for joining me for this virtual launch, this Zoom launch of the paperback of my book, Infinity in the Palm of Your Hand. Here it is. Now, normally for a book launch, the author's friends and the publisher's friends, put this away, end up in a bookshop and stand around drinking glasses of wine and eating nibbles and go down the pub afterwards. But this is the best we can do at the moment. So what I'm going to do is give a short talk about my book, the subject matter of my book, and afterwards I'll answer questions. I'll do my very best to answer questions. So Infinity in the Palm of Your Hand is actually was actually 50 bonkers things about the universe. I'm constantly amazed that we live in a universe which is so much stranger, so much more mind-blowing than anything that we could possibly have invented. So really, I'm just going to talk to you about some of the bonkers things in my book. So I brought along my pet mosquito, Terry. I don't know if you can see him. He's very, very small. Now, Terry is made of atoms like you and me. And an atom, if you remember from school, is like a miniature solar system with a nucleus at the center, like the sun, around which electrons orbit like planets. And the nucleus has a positive electric charge and the electrons a negative electric charge. And if you remember from school, unlike charges attract. And it's this attraction that binds an atom together. Now, say I could magically remove all the electrons from Terry. Okay, now that would just leave the nuclei, which are positively charged. And if you remember again from school, like charges repel. And so all the atoms in Terry would fly apart. Terry would explode. So the question to you is, would Terry explode with A, the energy of a sparkler, B, the energy of a stick of dynamite, C, the energy of a hydrogen bomb explosion, or D, the energy of a global mass extinction? Now, when I do this in front of, or ask this question in front of a live audience, I can tell you that pretty much nobody goes for a sparkler. A lot of people go for B, a stick of dynamite, and some people think it's a trick question, and they believe Terry would explode with the energy of a hydrogen bomb. But the answer is actually D. Terry would explode with the energy equivalent of a global mass extinction. So an energy equivalent to the kinetic energy of the city-sized asteroid that slammed into the Earth 66 million years ago and wiped out the dinosaurs. And what this illustrates is the unbelievable, phenomenal strength of the electric force. Now, I think the gravitational force is strong. I mean, if I leap a meter into the air, I'm pulled back down by gravity. But the electric force is immensely stronger than the gravitational force. Not by a factor of 10 or a factor of 100 or even a factor of 1,000,000. The electric force which operates in the atoms in your body is in fact 10,000 billion, 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 billion times stronger than gravity. So you might wonder, well, why don't we notice this phenomenal force? And basically that is because all normal matter, including you, is an equal mix of negative and positive electric charge. So the attractive force is exactly cancelled out by the repulsive force. So when you walk past someone on the street, there's no indication that this phenomenal force is operating in both of you. You aren't attracted to them or repelled by the electric force. But if you can create a charge imbalance, as I did with Terry, you can unleash this force. And we now recognize that this is what happens in thunderstorms. So basically there is a separation of electric charge between a cloud and the ground. And in order to equalize those charges, there is a discharge of electricity, electric current, a lightning bolt. And really, in order to power our homes, we have exploited this incredible electric force. Now, you may wonder, or I used to wonder, how is it that electricity can power uh, all the lights in my house, my toaster, my washing machine, but not only my lights and toaster and washing machine, but the lights of billions of people? And the answer is that by by unleashing this force, we can do that. So what we do in our power stations really is we effectively create a charge imbalance, not as big as the one that blew apart Terry, but big enough to, extract and drive all of our machinery. So my really, again, my first bonkers thing about the universe, that there is this force, which is 10,000 billion times stronger than gravity, operating in you and me at this very moment, and you don't notice it. My next bonkers thing about the universe is that you were born 100% human, but you die 50% alien. And the reason for this is that 50% of the cells in your body do not belong to you. They are foreign organisms, fungi, bacteria. For instance, there are about 10 million bacteria living on every square centimetre of your skin. And some of those bacteria are essential, like the gut bacteria. They help you digest your food. If you destroy them, if you kill them by using a broad spectrum antibiotic to kill some pathogen, then you end up with diarrhea because you can't digest your food. Now, all these foreign organisms you do not have when you are born. You inherit them from your mother's milk, and you also get them from your environment. And by the time you're about 3 years old, they're all in place. So it's true that you are born 100% human, but you die 50% alien. In fact, it's actually a lot worse than that, because it turns out that 99.75% of the DNA in your body belongs to those foreign microorganisms. And only 1/400th, that's 0.25%, belongs to your cells. So really, it's true that you were born 100% human, but you die 99.75% alien. Now, my next bonkers thing about the world is that the crucial survival advantage that humans had over Neanderthals was sewing. Now, this is a serious suggestion by paleoanthropologists. You see, nobody has ever found a Neanderthal bone needle, although lots of human bone needles have been found. So it could be that it was the ability to sew baby clothes in the bitterly cold Ice Age winters that gave human babies a crucial 1 to 2% survival advantage over their Neanderthal peers, and explains why we survived, but the Neanderthals became extinct 40,000 years ago. But as with all stories, it's not quite as straightforward as that. It's more complicated. 2.5% of the DNA in your bodies is Neanderthal. It seems that over human history or hominid history, there were multiple species of hominins. Only today is there one species, Homo sapien, but there were multiple species, and humans and Neanderthals did interbreed. So 2.5% of your DNA is Neanderthal. But the key thing is that your 2.5% is not the same as anyone else's 2.5%. And when you add it all up, something like 70% of the Neanderthal genome is still in existence. And given that there are 7 billion people on the Earth, it's actually true that there is more Neanderthal DNA around today than there was when the Neanderthals were around. So my next bonkers thing about the universe is that if the sun were made of bananas, it wouldn't make any difference. The thing you need to know is, why is the sun hot? The sun is hot for an incredibly simple reason, because it contains a lot of matter, a lot of mass. And all that mass is crushing down on the core of the sun. It's being crushed by gravity. And it squeezes the material there. And as anyone who squeezed the air in a bicycle pump knows, it gets hot. And at the heart of the sun, the temperature is about 15 million degrees. And at that temperature, all matter dissolves into an anonymous amorphous state known as a plasma. It doesn't matter what that matter is, it always ends up as a plasma. So the sun is a billion tons of mostly hydrogen gas. But if you were to get a billion tons of microwave ovens, or a billion tons of bananas and put them in one place, you would end up with something equally as hot as the sun. But what I've told you is why the sun is hot at this instant. What I haven't told you is why it stays hot. Now, clearly, the sun is radiating heat into space, but it doesn't change its temperature. And that tells us that something is replacing the heat exactly as fast as it is lost. Now, in the 19th century, in an age powered by steam, it was obvious to guess that the sun was a lump of coal. Obviously, it would be a lump of coal more than 1,000,000 kilometers across, the mother of all lumps of coal. So you could ask the question, how long would that lump of coal stay hot before it cooled down and radiated all of its heat? All you had to do was look at a lump of coal in a grate and time how long it took to cool, and then scale it up to the size of the sun. And 19th century physicists like William Thomson, Lord Kelvin, did this calculation, and they discovered that the sun could only burn for about 5,000 years. It would burn out after 5,000 years. And that was not even enough for Archbishop Usher. He had famously calculated from the Bible, he was an Irish bishop, that the earth, and by implication the sun, was born on the 23rd of September, 4004 BC at 9 a.m. in the morning. And 5,000 years wasn't even enough for the geologists. They'd gone to islands like Madeira off of the coast of Africa, and they'd found fossil sea creatures on the tops of mountains. And the obvious inference was that the mountains had begun their lives beneath the ocean and had risen up to their current height. But nobody sees a mountain rise in a human lifetime. So it was obvious to the geologists that the Earth had to be tens of millions of years old. But 5,000 years wasn't enough for the biologists either. Charles Darwin had come up with his theory of evolution. And basically it said that all organisms on Earth had arisen or diversified from a single universal ancestor by a process of natural selection. But nobody sees a species evolve or change in a human lifetime. So Darwin knew that the Earth had to be hundreds of millions, if not billions of years old. And in the 20th century, we've discovered from looking at meteorites and dating them that the solar system, the sun and the Earth, are about 4.55 billion years old. So roughly 5,000 million years. Okay, remember, if the sun were a lump of coal, it would burn out in 5,000 years. But we now know that the Earth and the sun must be 5,000 million years old. So that tells us that the sun has been burning for 1,000,000 times as long as it could possibly be burning if it were a lump of coal. Or to put it another way, whatever is powering the sun is an energy source 1,000,000 times more concentrated than coal. And in the 20th century, we discovered such an energy source. It's nuclear power. What the sun is doing is fusing the nuclei, the cores of hydrogen atoms, the lightest atoms, together to form helium. Now, this is a multi-step process. It turns out that a hydrogen nucleus is like a single Lego brick, but a helium nucleus is 4 Lego bricks. So the first step in this process is to stick 2 Lego bricks together, two hydrogen nuclei, 2 protons. But on average, it takes 2 protons, 2 hydrogen nuclei in the sun, about 10 billion years to find each other and stick. And it's because this first nuclear reaction in the chain required to make helium is because it is so unbelievably, mind-bogglingly inefficient that the sun will spend about 10 billion years burning its fuel, and there has been time for intelligent life like us to evolve. So I just want to finish by telling you how inefficient, or giving you an impression of how inefficient the sun's nuclear reactions are. if you were to take a chunk of the sun, the center of the sun, the size and shape of your stomach, and you were to compare it with your stomach actually generates heat at a greater rate. So you might wonder, well, how can the sun stay hot? Well, of course, the sun doesn't have one chunk the size and shape of your stomach. It has countless quadrillion chunks the size and shape of your stomach, all stacked together. And that explains how it stays hot. Right, my next bonkers thing about the universe is really not astronomical, it's archaeological. There was no change in the design of stone hand axes for 1.4 million years. So for 60,000 generations, our ancestors looked at our stone hand axe and could not see any way to improve it. Now remember, today, we expect the iPhone to be different next year. So what this emphasizes is that for most of human history, our ancestors have lived in a time of constancy. And only recently have we lived in a time of change. What caused the difference was about 13,000 years ago, when we came out of the Ice Age and we invented food production, farming. So we were able to farm crops and keep animals. And previously, people lived in small bands because they'd hunted things and they gathered berries. But once you start farming, you have to settle in small settlements because you have to be close to your fields. And those fields, if you're lucky, produce a surplus. And so you can support a larger population of people who have jobs which are not related to hunting or gathering. So potters and sword makers and bakers and all these kind of people. So what farming allows you to do is have big settlements. And once you get big settlements, you get the exchange of ideas. And basically the last 13,000 years of history can be described by three words: interaction, interaction, interaction. As our settlements have grown bigger, there's been more and more interaction, and there's been more innovation. So that explains why we live in a time of change. Everyone in the last 13,000 years has lived in a time of change, and everyone who lived before did not. But that change is accelerating, and it's accelerating because of computers. In 1965, Gordon Moore, who was the president of Intel, the American chip manufacturer, noticed that the computing power was doubling every 18 months. So the number of transistors, computing elements that you could put on a chip, was doubling every 18 months. And Moore's law has continued for the last 4 decades. And that doubling every 18 months has brought about the revolution in which we live with the internet and computers and smartphones and everything like that. But a doubling every 18 months is what we call exponential growth. And it very quickly reaches the limits of how small you can make electronic components, how fast you can make them communicate with each other. And so it cannot go on forever. A ceiling will be reached perhaps in 10 or 15 years' time, when this Moore's law stops and exponential increase in computing power stops. But just think for a moment, we are living at this incredible, unique time in history, the only period in history when computing power grows exponentially. Now, to introduce my next bonkers thing about the universe, which is basically that brains are very energy hungry, I want to tell you about the juvenile sea squirt. Now, the juvenile sea squirt swims through the ocean looking for a convenient rock to cling to. And when it finds that rock, it no longer needs its brain, so it eats it. And what this illustrates is that brains are energy hungry, and most organisms, if they possibly can, dispense with brains. In fact, most organisms on Earth do not have brains. So the big question is, why do we have such a big brain compared to our mass? Well, part of the reason is that we switched our diet from plant eating to meat eating. And meat is a more concentrated energy source than plants. So that allowed the growth of a bigger brain. But another important factor was the harnessing of fire. And that allowed us to cook our food. When you cook food, you break down the proteins into their constituent parts. So you do something that the stomach would do. So a frying pan is an external stomach in the same way that writing or a notebook is an external memory. And by outsourcing what the stomach would do, so we don't have to do the things that great apes like gorillas do, we don't have to spend all day digesting food with a huge stomach, because we've outsourced that to a frying pan or to cooking, our brains, there's more energy available for our brains, so they have grown. But actually, it turns out that our brains are shrinking. Our brains are smaller than the brains of people from 15 to 30,000 years ago. The reason has probably to do with the fact that they lived in a very harsh world, a world where they had to catch their own food and they probably had to avoid saber-toothed tigers and predators. We don't live in that world because we've outsourced most of the things that we do to other people. We don't catch our own food, most of us don't. We don't make our own tables. We don't build motor cars. I don't build computers. Other people do that. So we don't have to have our wits about us all the time. And when we look at the animal kingdom, we find that if there's a domesticated animal, its wild cousin is very often, nearly always, bigger and has a bigger brain. So it turns out that our brains are smaller, and in fact, we're also 10% smaller in size. Not only our brains 10% smaller, but our size as well, because we have domesticated ourselves. Now, my last bonkers thing about the world is that you could fit the entire human race in the volume of a sugar cube. And the reason for this is that matter is very empty. Atoms are very empty. Again, if we remember that they're like a miniature solar system with a nucleus at the center like a sun, around which planets orbit, around electrons orbit like planets. Now, the playwright Tom Stoppard had this fantastic image. He said that if the nucleus of a hydrogen atom were like the altar at the center of St. Paul's Cathedral, then the electron was like a moth in the cathedral, 1 minute fluttering by the altar, the next by the dome. But even this doesn't really tell you how much empty space there is in atoms. So I'm going to tell you now as a percentage, and I'm going to count it off on my fingers. The amount of empty space inside an atom is 99.9999999999999%. In fact, there's so much empty space inside atoms that if you were to remove all the empty space in all the atoms of all 7 billion people on Earth, they would indeed fit in the volume of a sugar cube. It'd be a very heavy sugar cube, of course. Now, this isn't just theoretical. There are objects out in the universe where all the empty space has been squeezed out of their atoms. They're known as neutron stars. They're the end point of the evolution of massive stars, which explode as supernovae. And paradoxically, when a star blows off its outer layers, the core implodes, and we believe that it's the implosion of the core that actually drives the explosion of the supernova. And as the core implodes, all the empty space is driven from the atoms of the core, and we end up with a neutron star. And this is about the size of Mount Everest, but it actually has the mass of the sun. And if you could go to a neutron star and dig out a chunk the size and shape of a sugar cube, it would indeed weigh as much as the human race. So the question is, why are atoms so empty? Why is the nucleus so small compared to the atom? Well, the answer to that is quantum theory. Quantum theory is our very best explanation of, or description of, the submicroscopic world of atoms and their constituents. It's fantastically successful. It's given us lasers and computers and nuclear reactors. It explains why the sun shines and why the ground beneath our feet is solid. But it also provides a window on a counterintuitive Alice in Wonderland world just beneath the skin of reality. It's a place where a single atom can be in two places at once, where an atom can influence another atom on the other side of the universe instantaneously, where things happen for no reason. And all these mad quantum phenomena uh, are a consequence of a simple observation. The observation is that the basic building blocks of matter, the ultimate building blocks, the electrons and atoms, have a strange dual nature. They can behave like particles, like microscopic billiard balls, and they can also behave as waves, like ripples on a pond. Now, don't even try and get your head around this, because it turns out that the quantum world has no analog in the everyday world. But the important thing to realize is that the smaller the particle, the bigger its quantum wave. And the smallest particle in nature is the electron. And that means it has the biggest quantum wave. And it's because the quantum wave of an electron needs loads and loads of elbow room that atoms are so big. Now, if there's one thing that, to my mind, encapsulates the madness of the quantum world, it's this. It's that the British physicist J.J. Thomson got the Nobel Prize for showing that an electron is a particle, and his son got the Nobel Prize for showing that it isn't. Thank you very much.